from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast.
Coming up on Ag Day, tariff turmoil as the world seeks answers from the White House.
I'm Michelle Rook. Is there danger of a trade war with China? I'll have the story coming up.
And agribusiness digging into dairy.
Certainly, if you look at the January numbers, we elevated the cow numbers another 4,000 as growth continues outside of the Midwest.
And using 3D printers to help doctors simulate a patient's heart before surgery.
Ag Day, brought to you by the Chevy Silverado, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Even though congressional leaders are rejecting President Trump's plan to assess tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, the president says he will not retreat. However, he is now tying the NAFTA negotiations to the threat of steel tariffs. The president says that North American neighbors, Canada and Mexico, will get no relief from his new tariffs on metal imports unless a new and fair free trade agreement is signed. The latest round of negotiations wrapping up in Mexico City.
As President Trump has said, we hope for a successful completion of these talks, and we would prefer a three-way tripartite agreement. If that proves impossible, we are prepared to move on a bilateral basis if agreement can be made.
In a tweet Monday, the president saying tariffs on steel and aluminum will only come off if new and fair NAFTA agreement is signed. He went on to tweet, also, Canada must treat our farmers much better.
Canada would view any trade restrictions on Canadian steel and aluminum as absolutely unacceptable. We will always stand up for Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. Should restrictions be imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum products, Canada will take appropriate, responsive measures to defend our trade interests and our workers.
House Speaker Paul Ryan says the U.S. economy would suffer from a proposed import tax on metal. In a statement from his office, Speaker Ryan is extremely worried about the consequences and urging the White House to not advance with this plan. European Commissioner President Jean-Claude Juncker said the EU would target imports of several iconic products, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which are made in Ryan's home state of Wisconsin, and Kentucky bourbon, home state for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The worry pertaining to more than just motorcycles and bourbon, but machinery and construction equipment. A trade expert at Ohio State University saying if the U.S. implements tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, the most direct impact to farmers as a whole could be on the production and prices of equipment.
It's not clear whether this is going to be an across-the-board tariff against all suppliers of those two metals, or whether it's going to be targeted just at China and a few other countries. But if it includes Canada and Mexico, Mexico produces steel, I think that has a huge potential to undermine the NAFTA renegotiations.
The Association of Equipment Manufacturers saying the tariff implementation will have a dramatic impact on equipment since U.S. ag and construction equipment manufacturers export roughly 30 to 35% of their products overseas, and the U.S. imports a large amount from our NAFTA partners.
As we look at this, especially with China and everything, when really Canada is like 16% of the imports are coming from Canada, another 9% from Mexico. So 25% of that steel is coming from our partners in NAFTA. So now you're affecting their economies, and you're not getting to the root cause of the problem here, which is outside of those two countries. So that's really a dilemma with this.
Slater says 10 to 20% of the price of a machine will be the cost of steel. And he says steel manufacturers here at home are already raising rates and prices in anticipation of a tariff coming. He's seeing some steel companies increase steel prices up to 30% over the last few months. World Trade Organization Director General Roberto Azevedo expressing concern over President Trump's plan for tariffs on steel and aluminum imports at 25% and 10% respectively. Azevedo says the WTO is clearly concerned the potential for escalation is real. Michelle Rook reports U.S. farmers are assessing just how negative a trade war, especially with China, could be for U.S. ag.
Uncertainty about trade under the Trump administration continues, with recent tariffs on Chinese imports of steel and aluminum leaving agriculture concerned about a possible trade war. That's especially true for the soybean industry, as China is its #1 customer.
Scares us to death because 60% of our soybeans are exported, and China takes $14 billion worth of soybeans.
ESA leaders see Chinese tariffs on U.S. beans would be devastating to the market.
Well, I think it would be very negative in the short term, and it would take 2 to 3 or 4 years before we could recapture that market back again.
In fact, the soybean industry has been bracing for retaliation, but sorghum was dealt the first blow.
On the 4th of February, the Chinese government filed an investigation, both countervailing duties and anti-dumping investigation against U.S. sorghum.
They're in the second phase of the WTO investigation and have already felt a market impact.
We have seen our individual producers, just with the announcement of the investigation, see a drop in prices.
Corn farmers have also faced trade disruptions in the last several months with Chinese tariffs on U.S. DDGs and ethanol, and they hope corn isn't next.
A trade war, if they would start putting tariffs on things, or tariffs on things coming out of the country, that would be detrimental to the U.S. It'll affect farmers' bottom line.
U.S. Grains Council officials emphasize China's tariffs are just a speed bump, as they need U.S. product to feed a growing middle class and as they push to 10% ethanol.
They did place a tariff on U.S. ethanol going into China, but despite that tariff, we've continued to see some ethanol exports going into China.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue says while there's reason for anxiety, he's hopeful they can avoid a trade war and protect U.S. agriculture.
We need to have efforts that make sure that agriculture is not harmed in a way that would be hurtful in any kind of tariff negotiations.
I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
Thanks, Michelle. In addition to concerns about China retaliation, the president of the European Commission says he'll bring forward a proposal for WTO-compatible countermeasures against the U.S. in the next few days. Heavy rains and now widespread flooding being reported from Cincinnati to Memphis. USDA's grain transportation report saying the high water causing navigation disruptions in sections of the Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, and Arkansas rivers. Several locks have been closed and barge tow sizes are being reduced from 40 to 30 barges on the lower Mississippi River. Those restrictions will likely stay in place for several weeks. Barge traffic has also been restricted to daylight passage only in other locations. Cindy's back in the studio covering for Mike today. She joins us now with a look at crop comments. Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Clinton. Let's start off in Bladen, Nebraska during the middle of calving season. Darren Niemeyer sent us a photo of his first-time heifers, which most of them have calved, and now his cows are starting to calve too. He says the region is sunny and windy. He hopes the area stays warm since there's snow to the north of him. Speaking of the north, Buck Becker sent us this photo from his cow-calf operation in snowy Bismarck, North Dakota. It looks as if the snow will let up later in the week. Let's take a look at those winds. We were talking about that in Nebraska, and we're looking at some pretty windy conditions as you get into much of the Central Plains today, and that's going to continue as we head through the day today, but it will eventually improve as we head into the overnight hours and into tomorrow. But obviously that's going to be a big issue for the plains, which are very, very dry, and that could of course increase the risk for fire danger. We'll have your national forecast coming up in just a few minutes, but for now, here are some hometown temps.
Your next piece of equipment is on MachineryPete.com. Search equipment from dealerships across the country to find what you're looking for. Only on MachineryPete.com.
All right, when we come back, we'll check on the dairy markets and why one analyst isn't expecting big changes for prices in 2018. And later, 3D printers promise to revolutionize our world, but could they save your life? That story today on In the Country. In agribusiness, it was a mostly higher day for commodities on Monday. Let's see where things closed from the floor of the CMU Chicago.
On this Monday, the soybeans were up. It seems like we're starting the week all over again. The market's taking a look at Argentina. That drought is really getting serious down there, and I think that it's got everyone's attention. Even though we had some of a sell-off on Friday, that was starting to march back a little bit. Right now, the estimates of the crop in Argentina is expected to be at a 6-year low. Right now, the corn has been kind of steady, so we were kind of weren't understanding exactly why that didn't have a little bit more of a lift. But it seems that the mixed trading has the futures just moving sideways and consolidating. The trend still remains bullish, and so we expect that market to kind of pick up. There is some concern that there'll be some retaliation by China that will stop buying soybeans and corn from the U.S. That possibly could hurt our market, so it's got some of the traders just on the sidelines a little bit cautious.
Mike North with Commodity Risk Management Group, our guest today. Mike, as we talk about the dairy market, I've heard both sides of this coin, right? Like the prices are going to go down, they're not going to be good. I've also heard people saying, oh, we're going to go back to 17. What do you think?
Well, the reality is we have a lot of milk, and it's not just a U.S. story. Certainly, if you look at the January numbers, we elevated the cow numbers another 4,000 as growth continues outside of the Midwest. We've watched year-over-year growth rate for the last 5 years, more milk in the system every single month. That probably doesn't end very quickly. At the same time, there's this chatter, and you go back to the other side of the coin about the drought in New Zealand, Australia, and how production is falling there. But at the same time, for every pound that they're losing, we're gaining 7.5 pounds of new production in Europe. And so there's massive milk coming into the equation, big powder supplies both here and in Europe. We're looking at massive inventories of cheese and butter and whey concentrates and dry whey. And so as we talk about the path forward, we've really got to see a big growth in consumption to get out in front of this supply. And I don't see that coming anytime quick.
Do you think China will consume more of that powder? We've heard that more powder is going to be shipped to China this year.
China has continued to buy more, but even then, we can't get through that inventory fast enough with the added Chinese demand. We're going to be behind the 8 ball on that for a while. It's really the other categories. What can we do on butter? What can we do on cheese? You know, where do we see fluid as it comes out of New Zealand, Australia, you know, the UF milk into China? What kind of other opportunities do we have, and how can we draw down some of those other supplies? Because at home, our biggest influencers are cheese and butter, and then to a lesser degree some of the other products. Sure. Can we draw those inventories down? And that'll be a big conversation point. Right now, there's so much milk as we head into the spring flush, going into the vat and going into the churn. It's going to be very difficult to get in front of that. So I see some really strong headwinds for milk prices as we go through the spring. And if we go down far enough, and if we hold there long enough, maybe then we can retract cow numbers, we can retract supply, and ultimately give us a little brighter picture as we talk about the second half of the year going into 2019.
All right, well, it's some turbulent times. It sounds like it's going to be a dynamic year, especially in the dairy.
Absolutely, so producers need to be mindful of these rallies when they come.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks, Mike. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a couple minutes.
Cut through the uncertainty in the markets. Give Mike a call at 608-764-0012. Ag Day, brought to you by Prosaro Fungicide from Bayer.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Cindy Clausen in for Mike Hoffman as we look at the map here, Cindy, and it's been kind of a interesting start to the week, really to say the least. Two systems on the map almost.
Yeah, and the main one kind of is a bigger one. You can almost separate it because we've got snow on one end of it, but then we've got rain on the other end heading into the southeast. So let's take a look at the map. And for the southeastern United States, it's mainly going to be rain, but notice closer to the warm front, we might have a bit of mixed precipitation. Heading all the way back up to the end of the occluded front, we're going to be seeing snow in those colder temperatures up north. As we put this into motion, that's still going to be the main focus across the country as we see that front pull all further to the east. The low going to be kind of slow going, moving through the Great Lakes, so we'll see the snow in much of the northern areas, but again, we could see some mixed precipitation as well as you get into parts of central and southern Indiana and Illinois, heading into Ohio as well. As we go into Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, we'll continue to see that snow as we see moisture wrapping around that low. Most of the front starting to head offshore, though we will start to see some of that moving into southern Florida. Meanwhile, we're seeing mostly quiet weather out in the western half of the country, but another system will approach, and that will start to bring some wet weather into parts of northern California. But here's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Still snow for the Great Lakes area, and unfortunately, we're going to start to see this becoming more of a nor'easter with this second low as we start to see rain and snow moving back up the coast once again. Now, as far as precipitation, it's mainly going to be this system in the middle of the country, and you'll see that pushing on off to the east. So remember, the northern area is snow. We've got rain on the southern end of that. And speaking of snow, there's been a fair amount with this system as it's been pulling in that moisture, and that will continue to move into the east, but with lesser amounts as you get into the central and eastern parts of the Great Lakes. But then it picks up again as that system gains strength over the ocean. All right, as far as temperatures are concerned, 20s, 30s, even a few 40s across the northern tier states, mainly 60s and 70s, a few 50s in the south as well. Heading into the overnight hours, we're going to be seeing those temperatures down into the teens across some of the north central United States, 30s, 40s to 50s into the southern parts of the United States. Look at that, down to 25 in Amarillo. Heading into your high temperatures for tomorrow, we'll see them pretty similar, maybe a few degrees cooler in some spots, but we're starting to warm up far south. As far as the jet stream is concerned, we've got some active weather here in the nation's midsection. You've got that trough that's going to be translating off into the northeast. Now, eventually we're going to see this ridge building into the west. That will bring some warmer air, but then another kind of cutoff low for the southeast as we get into next week. All right, that's a look at your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Cookeville, Wyoming, mostly sunny and cool for you today with a high of 30 degrees. Light snow and a little bit less breezy in Mineral Point, Wisconsin with a high of 36. And Maysville, South Carolina, rain likely for you, especially later in the day.
What kind of impact does NAFTA have in our trade with Mexico? We've got new numbers on the dairy side of things. That's next in our dairy report. And later, new technology may change the way doctors get parts for heart surgery.
Uh-oh.
In our dairy report, the National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council releasing its NAFTA impact numbers. Now, a new report showing the U.S. shipped $1.2 billion in dairy products to Mexico in 2016, more than $200 million more than 2002. And from 2012 to 2016, U.S. dairy exports to Mexico created more than 16,000 full-time jobs, rolling out more than $23 billion in economic output. Meanwhile, spot markets ending last week mostly higher. Class 3 milk prices climbing 8 and 9 cents on the March and April contracts, respectively. The fourth quarter of 2018 and 2019 are unchanged. Class 4 milk mostly down during trade last week. And it was a massive turnout for a Wisconsin dairy leader and his son-in-law. Some 5,000 people coming to the visitation and funeral for John Pagel and Steve Witz-Pollock. That's according to the Green Bay Press-Gazette. The men and their pilot died last month in a plane crash north of Indianapolis. Pagel owned Pagel's Ponderosa Dairy and helped form the Wisconsin Dairy Business Association and Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative. Now, the cause of that crash is still under investigation. New research using 3D printers allows doctors to simulate a patient's heart to find the best option before surgery. The details coming up in Ad for Your Health.
In the Country, sponsored by Kubota. Tractors, hay tools, utility vehicles, mowers, and more. Visit KubotaUSA.com today.
3D printers are used to make everything from toys to tools, including replacement parts on farm equipment. But now it's also being used to build replacement parts for hearts. Provided by the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, Barb Consiglio shows us how these custom parts are saving lives.
This is a patient's 3D printed aorta.
In this lab, engineers are able to simulate exactly what happens in a specific patient's heart.
So what the simulator is currently doing right now is imposing physiological flow and pressure through the patient's aortic valve.
It's a state-of-the-art model that allows experts to predict common complications in aortic valve surgeries, such as leaks, coronary blockages, and blood clots, giving patients like Bernice Belcher a greater chance for a full recovery.
I trusted my physician, and I felt that they knew what they were doing.
Bernice is thriving after her heart procedure thanks to a unique collaboration between doctors and engineers prior to surgery. Experts at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center used CT scans to create a 3D printed model, an exact replica of Bernice's aorta. They connected it to a heart simulator and reproduced the conditions of her heart and blood flow.
The ability to try and predict which valve will rest in there the most effectively and have the least amount of leak and not impinge upon adjacent structures is critical.
Doctors and engineers then discuss the results to confidently choose the best approach, valve, and placement for the patient, avoiding complications that sometimes arise after the valve is implanted.
This 3D reconstruction and modeling has directly informed the way we attack some procedures.
By doing these experiments, we are able to come up with the best possible scenario for that patient.
It's working for Bernice, who says she hasn't felt this good in years and is taking control of her heart health to keep it that way. At Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, this is Barb Consiglio reporting.
In addition to the custom 3D modeling, Ohio State's biomedical engineers are also developing new types of synthetic valves that will be more durable and cost-effective than current options. Pretty interesting there. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. Spent part of your day with us. For Cindy Clausen and all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.
AgDay, brought to you by Ram Commercial, America's longest-lasting heavy-duty pickups.